Here is a bulletin from CBS News. In Dallas, Texas, 3 shots were fired at President Kennedy's motorcade in downtown Dallas. The first reports say that President Kennedy has been seriously wounded by this shooting. More details just arrived. These details about the same as previously. President Kennedy shot today just as his motorcade left downtown Dallas. Mrs. Kennedy jumped up and grabbed Mr. Kennedy. She called, "Oh no," the motorcade sped on. United Press says that the wounds for President Kennedy perhaps could be fatal. Repeating, a bulletin from CBS News, President Kennedy has been shot by a would-be assassin in Dallas, Texas. Stay tuned to CBS News for further details.
Can you hear it? Oh, can you hear it? Oh, can you hear it?
Hello, hi, how are you? And welcome to another podcast by George. Well, there you go. 55 years ago today, about noon, Friday, on November 22nd, 1963, I remember it well. I was just a young lad sitting in a classroom, and one of the teachers came down the hall from the teacher's lounge with a transistor radio. She'd been listening to a little music, I think, during her break, and it was the news of the century, really, I believe, the assassination of John F. Kennedy on the streets of Dallas as the presidential motorcade took a slow left turn on Elm Street in front of the Texas School Book Depository. And everybody that's old enough remembers where they were at on that day. And I remember the day. It was a cloudy, cold, rainy day. And one of the reasons I remember it is I lived on a dirt road. And unless you have, you know what that means. You got to walk. It means no cars. It means no school bus. So we had to get off at the Four Corners, we called it. Maybe, it was less than a mile, but it was a distance from the house, and slog home down the dirt road in the mud, in the rain, on that Friday afternoon. My mom met us at the kitchen door, and being a Weisheimer like I was then and am still today, I said, "Well, did you hear the good news?" And she was in tears, to my surprise. And my mother was not an emotive type woman like that. She wouldn't cry over the death of another Hollywood personality or a musician or a politician, but she did certainly over the death of John F. Kennedy. My dad was on the road as a truck driver. He didn't even know about it. I don't think they had radios in the trucks that he drove for the company that he worked for. He stopped at a truck stop to get something to eat or drink, and a waitress in the truck stop told him that JFK had been assassinated. Well, here's the thing. Here's the important part of the John F. Kennedy assassination, and I believe it is extremely important, and that is that you have to understand or believe that Lee Harvey Oswald was the lone assassin. He was not part of a conspiracy. He was a nut with a gun on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. That's all there was to that, and there ain't no more. And it's important because if you believe, which some people do, not some people, probably millions of people believe, that the CIA, the FBI, Lyndon Johnson, or the mafia with a nod and a wink from American government was responsible for that assassination and or the conspiracy and or the cover-up that followed, along with the killing of Oswald by Jack Ruby. You can't believe that, because if you do, if you stand on that artificial premise, if you believe something like that, you would be the kind of person that could very easily vote for and very easily defend and support a politician like Donald Trump. And it's all that stuff, all of those conspiracy theories, it's all baloney. And I wanted to talk a little bit about it today and put forth some of the main reasons to rebuke the conspiracy theories regarding our country's involvement, even the mafia or foreign interest involvement in the killing of John F. Kennedy. You know, this has always been, I don't know if you'd call it a hobby, but an interest of mine. As a matter of fact, when I was in college, I took a course devoted to the assassination of John Kennedy, and that was during the time of the House Select Committee's investigation back in the late 70s, and they came up with a finding based on, I think, some flawed acoustical evidence that there probably was a conspiracy in the John Kennedy assassination, and at one time I kind of thought that there was, but I've looked at this very closely. I've read the literature, I've looked at the videos, I've listened to the audio, and my belief, beyond a shadow of a doubt, is it was only Oswald. And if you want to have an excellent opportunity, if you want to have an excellent look and form your own opinion, I encourage you to buy a book, 1,600 pages long, called Reclaiming History by Vincent Bugliosi. He recently died, I think just within the past 2 or 3 years. But Bugliosi was the Los Angeles-based prosecutor that convicted Charlie Manson, and he was an excellent investigator. He wrote the book Helter Skelter, and he wrote what really is the definitive work on the Kennedy assassination. It's 1,600 pages long. I mean, it's the largest book you'll own, but it also has a CD inside with another, 1,000 pages or something like that. But it's a great read, believe it or not, at that length. And after you read it, you also will be an expert on the Kennedy assassination. So here's what Bugliosi believes, and here's what I believe. I think one of the most compelling pieces of evidence that implicates Oswald as the assassin of Kennedy is that he tried another bushwhacking assassination just a few months earlier in the Dallas area. There was a guy named Edwin Walker. He was a general, and he was a conservative John Birch public speaker that ran around throwing off all kinds of right-wing Cucamonga edicts and beliefs. And, of course, what got under Oswald's skin probably was the fact that the guy was opposed to Cuba under Fidel Castro. But the guy lived close enough to Oswald that Oswald could walk to the alley behind this guy's house one night. He was sitting at a desk by a window, Walker was, working on his taxes, and Oswald took a shot at him with the same rifle that he used to shoot Kennedy with, which was later found in the rafters of the Texas School Book Depository. And the only reason that he didn't kill Walker, who has to have been the luckiest man on earth, was because the window had one of those wooden frame cross frames in it, and the bullet hit one of the wooden frames, which would have been hard for Oswald to see maybe from when he was sighting the rifle and shooting, and deflected and just missed the guy. Now, they recovered the slug, and they matched it to Oswald's rifle. It was deformed and had been damaged somewhat, but it had some of the same characteristics, and it's a certainty that Oswald did this because he left a note for his wife before he did it, and he talked to her about it after he did it. Marina Oswald testified to the Warren Commission all about it, and it's hardly known. Most people aren't even aware of it, but as some have described it, the Rosetta Stone for the Kennedy assassination was the attempted killing of General Edwin Walker while he worked on his taxes in the back office of his own house in nearby Dallas, from where Lee Harvey Oswald lived. And Oswald took his gun and walked home. Bugliosi covers this in his book, and after the first section of it, with all of the information on Oswald, all of the details and evidence implicating Oswald, Bugliosi comes up or summarizes 53 pieces of evidence that would convict Lee Harvey Oswald in this killing of Kennedy. And the point that Bugliosi makes is, and he's an experienced prosecutor, he's hardly ever seen where someone who is innocent has one piece of evidence that proves or points to their guilt. And he says never 2 pieces, and 3 pieces would be unheard of. And he says there are 53 pieces of evidence implicating Oswald. I'm going to pull some audio here from a C-SPAN interview or a C-SPAN video Vincent Bugliosi talking in the 6th floor School Book Depository Museum in Dallas back in 2007. Vince was great, and listen to him now as he talks about these 53 pieces of evidence.
Under those circumstances, with 53 pieces of evidence pointing towards guilt, it would not be humanly possible for Oswald to be innocent, at least not in the world in which we live. You know, I'm talking to you folks, you can hear me, there's going to be a dawn tomorrow. Not in that world. Only in a fantasy world can you have 53 pieces of evidence pointing towards your guilt and still be innocent. Let me just go over a couple of the pieces of evidence with you. Oswald's Mannlicher Carcano rifle was the murder weapon. I mean, come on, that's pretty strong evidence, right? The murder weapon was Oswald's. Of all the stock boys here in the building, he's the only one that flees the building after the shooting. There's a roll call. Where's Oswald? He's the only one that took off. 45 minutes later, Oswald shoots and kills Officer J.D. Tippit, the Dallas Police Department. I told the jury in London that that murder bore the signature of a man in desperate flight from some awful deed. 30 minutes later, Oswald resists arrest, pulls a gun on the arresting officer. During his interrogation, he told one provable lie after another, all of which show a consciousness of guilt. One lie he told showed a couple things. Number one, he was lying, and number two, he was pretty sharp. He said, I've never owned a rifle in my life. So they show him a photograph, the backyard photograph, holding the Carcano. And he says, well, that's my head, but it was superimposed in someone else's body. Pretty quick thinking.
Yeah, Oswald lied up and down to police when he was interviewed and arrested for the shooting of Kennedy. And, of course, he went to the Texas School Book Depository that day with full intention of killing Kennedy. He left a note for his wife, who, as soon as they went to her house after they found the rifle, she said, yeah, he had one. I mean, she knew that he had a rifle. They went out to the garage. It wasn't there. Why? It was in the rafters of the School Book Depository where Oswald hid it. But he lied about that when he was interviewed by police. Right after the killing, he fled, went to his rooming house, got his pistol and his jacket, and when stopped on the police because his description matched that of the suspect that they were looking for in the shooting of Kennedy. And by the way, they were looking for him because he was seen. Again, a lot of people aren't aware of this, but there were eyewitness reports of people that saw someone in the 6th floor window of the depository with a rifle who matched the description of Lee Harvey Oswald. J.D. Tippit, a Dallas police officer, stopped Oswald on the street just blocks from his rooming house as he was in flight with his pistol to question him, and Oswald shot him dead on the street without provocation or apparent reason. Well, the reason was he just killed the president. And then he went to the Texas Theater where he was arrested, and he took a poke at an officer in the theater, and they say tried to shoot him there as well. This guy is guilty and was responsible for the killing of Kennedy. Make no doubt about it. You know, by the way, I got to tell a story here, which I think is, again, one of the interesting sidelights of the Kennedy assassination. Bob Schieffer, that great CBS correspondent, reporter, and manned the anchor desk on the CBS Evening News for a number of years. He was a very young, almost cub reporter in a newspaper office in Fort Worth, Texas, the day Kennedy was shot, and he was working the city desk the next day, and a woman walks in. And in the dress of the attire of the day, she had on one of those little hats that all the women wore. And she says, well, I need a ride to Dallas. And Bob Schieffer looked up and he said, well, lady, I don't know if you realize this or not, but you're not in a taxi office. This is a newspaper we're running here, and I'm not in the business of driving you to Dallas. And she says, well, I think you'll want to drive me. She says, I'm Marguerite Oswald, Lee's mother. And Bob Schieffer said, oh, I guess so. So he gathers her up, they jump in his car, and he drives from Fort Worth to Dallas. And Schieffer was wearing kind of his uniform of the day as a reporter. He had a trench coat with a collar turned up and his snap brim hat on, and he was either a news reporter or possibly a detective or an FBI agent. At first glance, you couldn't tell the difference. So He walks into the Dallas police station where everybody's questioning Oswald, and Oswald's lying and trying to make his mark in the history books by saying some crazy stuff. And Schieffer, because he had Lee Harvey Oswald's mother in tow, got into the inner sanctum. I mean, he was right in there, almost in the interview room with Lee Harvey Oswald and the chief of detectives. And he just told people, I have his mother. They just assumed that he was a police officer. And then finally somebody looked at Bob Schieffer and said, I don't know, who are you? And Schieffer, being a newsman and being part of the not fake news, told the truth. So, well, I'm a reporter with the Fort Worth newspaper. And they said, get out of here. You can't be in here. But just by having her in tow and by having the look, Bob Schieffer almost got the exclusive scoop of the century in the Dallas police interrogation room. Well, anyway, that's just an aside. That's just a point of interest. So there's Oswald sitting in the Texas police station. They go and get his brother, and they bring him in, and he says later that there was no doubt in his mind that Lee did it. He said he looked like the bird that ate the canary. That's his brother that said that. He knew that Oswald shot Kennedy, but other people either didn't believe that he did, or they believed that there was a conspiracy that Oswald was a part of that resulted in the shooting of Kennedy. So let's pick up Vincent Bugliosi again, talking about the conspiracy theories after all of these ideas were put forth that somebody else, in addition to Oswald, was responsible for the shooting. Back to Vince.
So there's no evidence that any of these groups decided to kill Kennedy. But let's assume, just for the sake of argument, that one of these groups, like the CIA, said, let's murder President Kennedy. Oswald obviously would be one of the last people on the face of this earth that they would go to be the hitman. I mean, come on. Why? Well, number one, he wasn't an expert shot. He was a good shot, but he was not an expert shot. If you're going to pull off the crime of the century, you want an expert shot. Number two, he had a $12 mail order rifle. Number three, notoriously unreliable, extremely unstable. Here's a guy that defects to the Soviet Union pre-Gorbachev. I mean, even today, who in the world defects to the Soviet Union? One of the bleakest places on the face of the earth. And what does he do when he gets over there? He wants to become a citizen. They say no. He tries to commit suicide, slashes his wrist. Just the exact type of guy that the CIA or mob would say, this is the type of guy we want to rely on to commit the biggest murder in American history. I understand. Fine. Let's take it a step further. That one of these groups said, let's kill the president. And for whatever crazy, strange, bizarre reason, they want Oswald to be their hitman. Let's see if where that takes us makes any sense. After Oswald fled the book depository building, one of two things would have happened. Let me tell you the least likely thing first. The least likely thing is that there would have been a car waiting for him to help him escape down to Ecuador or wherever. That's the least likely scenario. They certainly wouldn't want their hitman to be apprehended and interrogated by the authorities. But I think you know what I'm going to say, that the most likely scenario by far, you have to know what I'm going to say already. If the mob or the CIA is behind Oswald, they're behind this whole thing, you have to know there would have been a car waiting for him somewhere around here, Elman, Houston, somewhere around here, waiting for him to drive him to his death. You have to know that. And yet he's out on the street, we know, with $13 in his pockets, trying to flag down buses and cabs. No sensible person could possibly believe that the CIA or mob would permit something like that. The parade route that brought him right beneath the window, the motorcade route, that wasn't even determined until November 18th, 1963, 4 days before the assassination. And it wasn't in the papers, as I recall, until the next day, Dallas Morning News, November 19th. Does any rational person actually believe that the CIA or what have you would conspire with Oswald to murder Kennedy 3 or 4 days before the president visited Dallas? That's just moonshine. It's crazy. There's no evidence that Oswald was connected to any of these groups in any way whatsoever. And believe me, the FBI conducted an extremely thorough investigation. I think it was Harold Weisberg, one of the great assassination critics. I say great because Harold was an honest man, wrote many books on the case, and I think it was Harold who said, you know, they checked out every breath that this guy ever breathed. From the moment he arrived back in the United States from the Soviet Union, I think it was June 13th, 1962, to the date of the assassination, they conducted 25,000 interviews. They found no evidence that Oswald was connected with any of these groups. Number three, let's assume that one of these groups said, we want to kill the president. I reject it out of hand. It belongs in a Robert Ludlum novel. Now, when I say I reject it out of hand, not in my book. I devote a great number of pages to all these crazy theories. But I'm telling you that the notion of, let's say, the Joint Chiefs of Staff sitting around a conference table or wherever they are, wherever they want to go, some mountain retreat, with the heads of major corporations, the military-industrial complex, saying, let's murder President Kennedy. I reject it out of hand. It's silly.
Now, you could spend all day, you could spend all week, you could spend all year looking into the Kennedy assassination, and time just won't provide for that or allow for that in this podcast by George. But I did want to talk just briefly about Jack Ruby, because he always comes into play here somehow, some way. Jack Ruby was a Dallas strip club owner. He was a bully. He had Chicago connections. He had talked to people with the mob, and people forever believe that that's part of what happened here, that Ruby killed Oswald to gain his silence. Well, here's the thing with Ruby. He was a nut, another nut with a gun. Two nuts with guns changed the history of the world in Dallas, Texas. But Ruby was a JFK devotee. He idolized the man. Not hard to do. JFK had some very admirable qualities, not the least of which was his war hero record. But he was so distraught over the killing of Kennedy and felt that his wife needed to be spared the rigors of a trial so much that he jumped in his car with his pet dog that he adored, called his wife, wouldn't go anywhere without her, and went to a Western Union office and wired one of his strippers some money that needed it out of town, and then looked over at the Dallas police station and late, not on time, not on schedule, Lee Harvey Oswald was being transferred to the county lockup. And the guy walked down a ramp, I think, and walked into the area where Oswald was to be loaded into a police van, and there he was. And Ruby, having a gun in his pocket, pulled it out, stuck it in Oswald's guts, and forever changed the course of history. And a couple of things. He would never have left his dog in the car if he was going to go kill somebody. He would never have gone to the Western Union office, and it's time-stamped. He definitely did that, and wire off money to a stripper calmly right before he went to kill Lee Harvey Oswald. And, of course, he would have had no way of knowing the time difference and would not have been able to coincidentally walk down that ramp at the precise moment that Oswald was being transferred. It's just what happens when you got nuts running around with guns. And boy, we know a lot about that today. And that's what happened in Dallas, Texas. So that's a little bit of a look and a summary by me. But let's get the official summary here from the man himself, the author of Reclaiming History, Vincent Bugliosi.
After over 40 years of the most prodigiously intensive investigation and examination of a murder in world history, certain powerful facts exist which cannot be challenged. Number one, not one weapon other than Oswald's Mannlicher Carcano was ever found and linked to the assassination. Not one weapon other than Oswald's Mannlicher Carcano. Not one bullet other than the three fired from Oswald's weapon was ever found and linked to the assassination. No person other than Oswald has ever been connected by any credible evidence to the assassination. Only Oswald. This is close to 44 years now. Thousands of investigators, they come up just empty-handed. No evidence has ever surfaced, as I indicated before, linking Oswald to any of these groups believed to be behind the assassination. And no evidence has ever been found showing that any person or group murdered Oswald and framed or murdered President Kennedy and framed Oswald for the murder that they committed. Now, one would think that faced with these stubborn and immutable realities, that the conspiracy theorists, unable to pay the piper, would fold their tent and go home. But instead, undaunted and unfazed, they continue to disgorge even more of what they've given us for the last close to 40 years, and that's just wild speculation, theorizing, and intentional dissembling of the facts.
Well, we're going to leave it there for right now because I can't summarize it any better than that. That is the late, great Vincent Bugliosi talking about his book, The Definitive Work on the Kennedy Assassination, Reclaiming History. And again, I recommend that you get that book. For one thing, you can always brag about the fact that you read a 1,600-page, I mean, this thing is an opus, this book that he has, but it's well worth it, and it's a great read. And it's 55 years ago today that the Kennedy assassination took place in Dealey Plaza down there in Dallas, Texas. And when we reach the 60th anniversary of the Lord's Will and the Creek Don't Rise, and I've still got a podcast, we'll revisit this and do a program that's more in-depth and more lengthy and befitting of a 60th anniversary. In the meantime, I want to thank everybody for listening in again. I want to encourage you to like us on Facebook, visit our web pages, check us out on Spotify, follow us on Twitter, all of those usual places. So, once again, enjoy your day, be a little reflective, remember the date, and that's another podcast by George.